In addition to the events of today, Leonard asserts that an automobile accident when he was 3 years old caused him to have a near-death experience. He recalled the meeting 38 years later. After that, he goes on to tell you about his incredible experience, which you really must listen to. Let us skip the introduction and jump right into the story. Leonard Rogers is my name. I didn't remember my near-death experience, NDE, from when I was a kid until my brother passed away. From my point of view, that is far from a coincidence. I was unable to bid him farewell in person. My brother's story piqued my interest. So I simply Googled what occurs when we die, since I had no idea what to anticipate. Videos of these near-death experiences surfaced on YouTube, and I watched them. Next, I turned my attention to a man from New Zealand by the name of Ian. Truthfully, I was just taking it easy on him at first, but after a while I paid close enough attention to see his emotions. This man isn't narrating, he's reliving it. I realized then, his emotions were authentic. In my hope of understanding my brother's experience, I became almost fixated on these tapes. Those who had caught a glimpse, I thought, would be the first to know. After that, I stumbled into Ian's second video. This one was more like a mini-movie in that you could see the subject matter as he spoke it. Even though I had seen the film multiple times by that point, something finally clicked. I remember that I thought to myself as Ian showed me what he had seen in the dark. When I realized my words, I yelled out, "What do I mean?" I recall that. Stepping away from the central processing unit, I stepped outdoors to smoke. When I was 3 years old, I was trailing behind my uncle as he crossed the street when a car crashed into us. Memories flooded back to me like a ton of bricks, and he had no idea. Then it was over. The truth is, I still have a hard time believing it. As if paralyzed, I stared up at the bumper of the hit automobile after the impact. Not even blinking allowed me to move. The words "let go" were shouted out by someone. I was startled awake by an intense, pulsating sensation that I can only describe as a tickling, and I quickly rose to my feet. From across the street, I could make out the voice of an individual beckoning to me. She was like a mother to me. I felt completely at peace with her. I was apprehensive about crossing the street to see her, I remember. Fear of being struck again gripped me tightly. Not verbally, but in my mind, the person reassured me that everything will be okay. Okay, I'll just go over there, I told myself. What I now understand to have been a life assessment started here. I felt lightheaded as a series of images or videos raced past me, one after another. First, there was a photo of myself, but with a few more years on my face. The videos and images seemed to be downloading in real time as I watched them. Things probably noticed my discomfort since they slowed down significantly, then came to a complete halt. Here I was staring at a picture of a young guy. The idea that I was gazing at my son startled me. Looking at this picture, I still couldn't believe it was my kid. I was gazing at a photo of my son when I was 3 years old. After a while, things picked back up, although much more slowly. Names of many previously unknown people and locations sprung into my head. Once it stopped, I was in a pitch-black chamber or cave. Like a kid who sneaks up on his parents, I felt like I shouldn't have been there. I was frightened by the night. Something about it made me think of Ian's video portrayal, where he stares directly at me. An incredible sense of calm washed over me as a gentle breeze swept over me. It was as if I had completely lost touch with what it meant to be afraid of the dark. Along with the individual who had called me, I was whisked back into the site of the accident. As I lay there on the ground, I felt as though this individual was holding my hand as I studied my body. The automobile whose driver collided with me was hunched over me, visibly distressed, but I couldn't help but wonder, why is that something that scared them? I'm Ock. His preoccupation with the item on the ground frustrated me because they have no notion what I'm doing here and have no knowledge that it even exists. Even though I was only 3 years old, I can still see how some of my ideas originated from a far more mature intellect. It would be reasonable to assume that my youth would force me to be hypervigilant. I may have been considering it, but even with the intelligence of a 10 or 15-year-old, I couldn't have understood or analyzed a thing. It seems like I spent a long time there, even if it was just 1 to 10 minutes. I don't know how time differs between this realm and that realm. I recall going to another shadowy place after I got tired or disgusted with the individuals and their feelings about that object, my corpse on the ground. I could sense the presence of others around me, but I couldn't see them. It was as though I was merely there to contemplate. The phrase "go to the light." I seem to remember hearing it irritate me. I confess that I was intentionally ignoring them because they were irritating me. Suddenly, I felt like I was flying or moving up in the air, having a conversation with someone. My whole world changed. I can only use the term perfect to describe him. Because my vision was impaired, I am unable to provide a detailed description of him, but I am able to paint a picture of his face. His immaculate beauty was secondary to the intensity of his gaze. Beautiful is an understatement when describing his eyes. Picture little sunbeams that, instead of being white or yellow, are all the colors of the rainbow. Those eyes were mesmerizing, if not completely mesmerizing. As we conversed telepathically, I was unable to look away. I don't remember much of what was said, but I was told I wouldn't remember anything specific. The assurance that I wouldn't remember every detail of the ordeal was somewhat unsettling to me. Before he returned to my body, he inquired as to my motivation for wanting to return. Surprisingly, since my mother was only carrying one of my 3 brothers at the time, my initial reaction was that I wanted to help her raise my younger siblings. At this point, he began to snicker and ask me why I wanted to return. I said that I hoped to die with the planet in a better state than when I found it. I can't help but feel a twinge of shame whenever I consider the possibility that I lied to or attempted to trick Jesus, all the while being aware that his eyes were scrutinizing me from head to toe, and I now truly believe that it was Jesus. Inquiring about my mother brought me crashing back to reality. Unsure of it, I kept thinking no, 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 until I was around 5 feet away. Then I looked up at the bumper once again. Going back to my body is something I remember. The only way I can describe it is that it seemed like I was being pushed into a dense, clay-like shape, or a solid but hollow object, if that makes any sense. As soon as I realized my mom was there, she swung me over her left shoulder to pick me up. Over the years, that's all I've remembered, and it confirms that I wasn't crying. Before, my mother was cradling me in her arms while she frantically checked me out, and she was sobbing. I knew I hadn't been crying whenever the accident was brought up, but I couldn't remember why. That frightened me, and the peace that had come back to me, the reason I hadn't felt the urge to cry, went away entirely. I remember wondering whether something had just happened to me. Please tell me. Plus, I started bawling. Despite only taking a few minutes, the entire ordeal felt like an eternity. Actually, I would have to say that 1 minute there is equal to 1 year there if I had to put it into a metric time scale. Something else, I was shown pictures of people I didn't know at some point in my experience, perhaps close to the start, though I can't be sure because the timeline is all over the place, and there was one picture in particular that made everything stop. I thought he was my son, therefore I was astonished to see this photo. In contrast to the typical practice of conducting a life review after the fact, I found myself gazing into the future. The potential life I could have was laid out for me in great detail. My future, like everyone else's, is uncertain and subject to change because, as far as I can tell, we all have free will. My brother's tragic death would be entwined with that. Keeping that in mind, I took a second take, confused and delighted, when my mother brought me home for the first time and set me down on the floor to play with my younger brother. "Hey, I've already grieved for you, but how am I looking at you now?" she seemed to be questioning. Anyway, in 38 years from now, I will not recall a single detail of this. During my early years, I vaguely remembered it, but as time went on, I gradually pushed it to the back of my mind until it was practically gone. At least till my brother passed away. To me, it's not a coincidence that the memory of him keeps popping back into my head after he passed away. I still can't get over it, but I'm much better at handling it now. Suddenly, my sadness transformed into jealousy of him. I really regret not remembering this before he passed away. He was plainly frightened of death, and I wish I could have comforted him about it, but I'm sure he found out. What follows is a near-death experience, NDE, of a woman whose encounter with a sinister entity transported her to a realm she had never imagined.